Today we're going to finish the second part of 2 Corinthians chapter 1. We talked about the first part last time, so we're going to do the second part today. And this is it's a pretty important chapter because it's a pretty important segment of the chapter in that it does deal with crisis, and in dealing with Christians in crisis, it raises the issue of mental health. And specifically, are there advantages to being a follower of Christ when it comes to mental health? Right? You might not think that there is if you just looked at all the people that have the Christian title, because having the Christian title doesn't confer many benefits. Just having the title, for most folks, that title means that their lives are pretty much very similar to their neighbors. And when you look at physical and mental illnesses, it's about the same because the title is thrown out there so easily. Having a Christian title doesn't mean that you're actually a follower of Christ. Being a follower of Christ means that you actually want to follow him. It means that you want to know what he said and try to obey. Okay, the fact that you guys came to a Bible study, I mean, you're following Christ, okay? That's not something that the average person who calls himself a Christian does, okay? So there's more to it than just, I have faith in Jesus. And you can still, I believe that you can not go to church and have faith that Jesus died for your sins and have that be sufficient to get into heaven. I think that's possible. But in terms of experiencing the full life, when Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly, I think that most people don't get in on the abundantly part because they don't put in a lot of effort to actually follow Christ. Okay? So it's very easy to get in. However, in order to experience the benefits package, that's not quite so easy. It does take some extra steps, right? So I think this will become more evident as we go through today's lesson. So we're going to start with, I think, verse 8 here in 2 Corinthians chapter 1.
For we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about our trouble in the West Coast province of Asia Minor, how we were utterly weighed down, beyond our strength, so that we despaired even of life itself. Indeed, we felt within ourselves that we had received the sentence of death, and were convinced that we would die. But this happened so that we would not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead.
So Paul is talking, this is very eloquently put. I believe this is the expanded translation. And he's very eloquently stating something. He's describing something that all of us have faced at some point, where you're looking at a problem that seems to be insurmountable. Your future is looking very bleak. You have such circumstances that if things play out the way they look like they're going to play out, you're going to lose big. You could lose financially. You could lose, your comfort. You could, being incarcerated. You can be sentenced. You could actually go to prison. You can lose all your money. You could end up in a divorce. You could end up in foreclosure. There's so many possible things that are really bad, and you're looking at your future and you're going, whoa. What do I have to look forward to? I'm looking at this situation, and if things continue the way they're happening right now, if things continue like this, I'm toast. This is horrible. And you think about that future that you're headed for, and it makes you depressed because you're looking at loss, pain, shame that you don't want, and yet here it is. Just because you don't want, and there doesn't seem to be any hope. That's what Paul is describing. We face that. And one thing that I want us to think about here is that you think about good examples of a Christian. Now, I realize before Paul was a Christian, he was a really bad guy. All right, he went around, he actually persecuted Christians. But after his conversion, this guy is working harder than all the other apostles, right? Look at what he's done. For crying out loud, half the New Testament. All right, here's a guy that God is paying attention to, that God obviously likes. When Paul does that, God is healing people through Paul even, right? So God is using this guy in everything. He's trying to stay in the center of God's will more than anybody I've ever met. Okay, when he says, wow, I want my countrymen, I want the Jews to be saved so much, I would trade my salvation. If it meant that they would be saved, I would give up my own salvation. I was like, okay, that's dedication that I don't have. All right, that's amazing. So Paul is like, on a scale of 1 to 10, he's an 11 in terms of great Christians. And God is letting him get exposed to threats that are this severe. When we go through stuff like this, I know the first thing I wonder when I'm facing one of these scary, insurmountable circumstances is, God, where are you? I need some protection here. Why did you let this happen? That's a natural thought that pops into my head. God, why'd you let this happen to me? What did I do wrong? Is this some kind of punishment? And the problem is that I'm not perfect. And so I can always find something I did wrong and to say, this could be, I'm not perfect. All right? And so here Paul, and he's going through this, but then he says what the reason was. It wasn't because God was angry with him. He's not being disciplined. It was because it was a lesson so that they wouldn't trust in themselves. And very often when we're in these situations, we need to realize that, God is there, and even though we don't know what the solution will be, we don't have a way out, God can get us out of this. Many years ago, when I was going through a divorce, we're talking, 30 years ago, it was a very long time, but it was horrible financially. It was a disaster. I was a resident at the time, and we had no money. And my wife kind of had an affair situation going on, and they had plenty of money. So the problem is that she got the good car, and I got the jalopy. I had a 1983 Cadillac Cimarron, which, according to Consumer Reports, was one of the worst cars in American history. And it lived up to its reputation with me. And so it was constantly breaking down. And I'd actually missed work because of that stupid car. And it kept breaking down. I needed a new car, but I had no money. I had to pay divorce lawyers. I had all the expenses because all of the debts that we had together were on me. And so, it's like we had, our income was based on two persons, and now it's one person. So it was just absolutely devastating. And I was desperate. Nobody in our family had any money, okay? And the other thing was I'd even resorted to buying lottery tickets, and okay, God, can you get me out of this way? And of course, I was lost. So one day I came home, and the car had broken down that morning, and I'm really frustrated and angry and scared. And on the news, this guy had won the lottery, and he was sitting there with the beer in his hand, and his family was around going, hey, like that right there. And I blew up at that. And it was like the last straw, because it communicated to me that it doesn't matter what you do. Being a Christian doesn't matter. Being in Bible studies and trying to do ministry and stuff, it doesn't matter. Life is arbitrary. And I screamed, that's what I told God. I was so furious. I was screaming at the ceiling. Angry at God. It's like, this is worthless. I'm done. I'm out. You have done nothing for me. You've let all of these horrible things happen that you could have prevented. I blamed him for everything. I was so mad. And then after I got through venting for about 15 minutes, I got to thinking, okay, I've lost the wife, the kids, probably going to lose the house. I have no car, so I'll probably lose my residency. I'll lose my job. I'm losing everything. God is all I got. And I got to thinking, wow, if I cross this bridge, I don't even have hope. And then I said, whoa, stop right there. It's like I can't give that up. So I go back to God and says, you know what? Everything I said, scratch that. No matter what I lose, I can't let go of you. You're all I got. And I'm not going anywhere. And when I did that, there was a sense of satisfaction, because you don't know what you're going to do at the end of your rope until you're at the end of your rope. And I was at the end of my rope. Okay, that was it. This was the bare end. I didn't know that that's what I would do. And so knowing that, I felt good that was my decision. The next day, my brother calls me and goes, guess what? I won the lottery. And he did. It's like $3.5 million. And he bought me a car. All right. Now the thing is that what that taught me was that, like, while I was screaming at the ceiling, he was literally at the party store buying the ticket. Okay, and he bought it out of mercy because he was with my uncle. We just came. Oh, my stepfather died at the same time, so he was literally coming home from the graveyard and stopped off, and the clerk offered my uncle the lottery ticket, and my uncle went off on him and says, "Oh, this is just a big ripoff. Nobody ever wins these things," and he belittled the guy. And so my brother, out of mercy, said, "I'll take the ticket. I apologize for my uncle," and that was the winning ticket. Okay. So the point here is not Christians should buy lottery tickets. The point here is that what it communicated to me was he heard the entire discourse the day before, and he responded. And even though, like, I saw my future as totally bleak, there was no hope. No, I couldn't borrow money from anybody. Nobody had. I mean, the kind of money that I needed was, and there's no way I'm going to have access to a new car. None. I had nothing. And when that happened, it showed me that when there is no way, God can make a way. And ever since that time, I've faced other calamities, but I have never experienced hopelessness on that level since that time. Because no matter what, God can always make a way, and he's demonstrated that. And so this is kind of what Paul's talking about here, is that, we face these horrible situations, but he doesn't want us trusting in ourselves and our own abilities to wiggle out of trouble. He wants us to trust him, but in God who raises the dead. In other words, even what are the possibilities that you're going to escape horrible circumstances? You're dead. Your future is dead. Well, God can handle that. He can do anything. All right?
He rescued us from so great a threat of death and will continue to rescue us.
And we believe Paul means that literally they were facing death. Okay?
On him we have set our hope, and he will again rescue us from danger and draw us near, while you join in helping us by your prayers. Then thanks will be given by many persons on our behalf for the gracious gift of deliverance granted to us through the prayers of many believers.
So yeah, man, so what we were facing was not the loss of finances, the loss of my chariot. It was the loss of life. Okay.
What chapter is that?
This right here is 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Okay. Now, what was he referring to? We don't know exactly. However, we do have some theories. In Romans 16, something is referenced.
Romans 16. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, who is a servant of the church which is at Cenchrea, that you receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints, and that you help her in whatever matter she may have need of you. For she herself has also been a helper of many, and of myself as well.
I mean, anybody that says that Paul was sexist, it's like, think about this. This is the Romans. It's like one of the huge Gentile churches, and he's saying, man, pay attention to Phoebe. She's doing everything right. Do whatever you can to help. He said that to all the believers. He's lifting this woman up. So if he's truly sexist, then why does he include so many women in his praises, right?
Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who for my life risked their own necks, to whom not only do I give thanks, but also all the churches of the Gentiles.
So, Paul's saying, look, my life was on the line. I was facing death. They risked their lives to save me and were successful. And all of the Gentile churches, the Philippians, the Ephesians, the Corinthians, everybody, they know about this. I can't stop talking about it. I almost died. I would have died had it not been for Priscilla and Aquila. And he told everybody about it. So, what do you mean he almost died? What was happening? According to many Bible commentaries, they think that he may have been thrown in with wild animals, because he did talk about that at one point, especially in Ephesus, that he was facing wild animals. And so he may have been sent to they did have an arena in Ephesus. They had a Colosseum. And so it is possible. Tertullian, he was the earliest commentator who stated that he was indeed talking about Paul fighting wild beasts in Ephesus. Okay, so that is a possibility there. What may have happened is that Paul was in the Colosseum for a short time, and Priscilla and Aquila argued in his favor with the authorities, and they risked exposing themselves. They could have been sent in, but they may have gone and say, do you realize he's a Roman citizen and that this is illegal? Okay, Paul is from Tarsus. He's legally a Roman citizen. You can't do this to him. And they may have pulled him out. We don't know for sure, but I think that sounds very logical. Clearly, something along those lines happened to where Priscilla and Aquila got him out of a death sentence, but put their lives at risk in doing so. Now, Paul, when he refers to his life being threatened, he uses this example of, I'm toast, I'm being thrown to the wild beasts. That's a death sentence. Over in 2 Timothy 4, he talks about, 2 Timothy 4 is that's the last book that Paul wrote, and it's right before his execution. And he talks about how everybody abandoned him, including Titus. Because in 2 Corinthians, he talks very highly of Titus. Titus was one of his main men. I mean, Titus was like his backup preacher, or one of his backup preacher, kind of like Timothy was, right? But even Titus went to Dalmatia. So all of the people closest to him were helping out. This is while he's in prison in Rome. All of the believers that were helping him had left. And so he's there by himself. And so he's saying to Timothy,
At my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom.
So he got a chance in Rome to state his case, but no defense attorney. And ultimately, he was beheaded on the same day, according to church history. He was beheaded on the same day that Peter was crucified upside down. Okay? But there was a stay of execution, he says, and I was delivered from the lion's mouth. Now, okay, so it sounds like they were considering actual throwing him to the lions. That's actually possible. So does he mean that figuratively or literally? It could go either way when you consider the situation.
He wouldn't have been the first to be delivered.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yes. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen. That's true. He will deliver us from every attack until it's our time. So yes, so Paul went through a series of deliverances up until the time when God says, okay, enough, it's time to come home. And then you're not delivered. Okay? Now, given a choice between being ripped apart by a lion and having my head cut off, I would choose the latter. I mean, when you think about it, would you rather be torn apart by crocodiles, eaten by a lion, or beheaded? Exactly. Let's get this over with. I don't want to watch my body being ripped apart and eaten. Yeah.
Let me roll my Calvin down.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about depression here, because it does, when you're dealing very commonly, when people fall into really bad depression, it's because circumstances started things off. Something happened. Something triggered this cascade, and people go deeper and deeper into it. So let's talk about what happens when we are looking at a really negative situation, such as, I was looking at financial collapse, loss of family, which was huge by itself, but then financial collapse on top of that. And what happens is that your brain looks at the situation, and your prefrontal cortex here, your prefrontal cortex is your problem-solving brain. Now, when you're faced with a problem, you use something called your central executive network, which relies heavily on prefrontal cortical nodes here. And what this does is it says, okay, here's the problem. How can I solve this? What resources do I have at my disposal to handle this? Okay? And so you activate your brain networks. Now, a healthy brain has lots and lots of connections. Each brain cell is connected to 10,000 other brain cells through synaptic connections. Okay, that's a very high level of complexity considering you have 100 billion neurons. So you're talking about incredible complexity. The greater the density, the better you are able to solve problems. Okay? So a boogity boogie.
Please repeat what you just said.
What part?
The problems.
Oh, okay. When you face the problems, your central executive network utilizes the prefrontal cortex to go through your memories, through your reasoning powers to say, what resources do I have to solve this, including what people resources, what abilities do I have, can I get another job, what resources are available, if I'm having trouble with the supervisor, can I go above their head, can I file a grievance, blah, blah, blah. And so it looks through all of your problems, and the healthier the network, the easier it is for you to access problem-solving skills, okay?
Thank you.
Now, what happens if you're facing a really horrible, horrendous, terrible situation, and you don't see a way through? All you see is pain, shame, and loss. Then every time you use this network, you come back with, you're right, it really is hopeless. Of course you're depressed. You should be depressed. You can't escape this. And so your brain is confirming that your future is going to be bad. You're getting confirmation after confirmation after confirmation. So what happens is, when you're using that network, it's coming back not only that there's no benefit to it, but it's actually painful. So what happens when you get stuck in that situation? This is what happens. The number of connections starts to dry up. So instead of having 10,000 connections per brain cell, we go to 7,000 and 5,000. All right? So this is what happens when people sink into depression, especially difficult to treat depression. You're looking at collapse of those networks and an atrophy. So now, when facing a problem, you no longer even have the resources for problem solving. Now you're stuck in a really bad place. Okay? So, what is the benefit of being a Christian, or being a follower of Christ? Because I don't like saying, being a Christian is a magic pill. No, I do not want to support that idea that somehow that Christian label gives you anything but a label, because that's all it is. People have expectations that walking into a church suddenly gives you access to all the benefit package. It does not. Okay, but if you are really a follower of Christ, and you've gotten into the habit of going to God with your tragedies, with your terrible things, with the scary stuff, and what you will experience is that God is real. You will experience God can deliver you. That is universally. That's what happens. That's the normal Christian life. The normal Christian life is you go to God and you see something, all right? He does. Now, he might not do things exactly as you want, but the thing that you fear most almost always doesn't happen. Almost always. Okay? Almost always. Because God is real. And recognizing that reality, what happens is that when your central executive network starts looking through problem solving, it comes across, I don't have extra money to buy a car. I can't, get my wife and kids to come back. I can't, I don't have any money. I don't have any relatives to get me out of this mess. All right? And so I got nothing here. But if you've had experience with God, then you do find something. Wait a minute. I don't have a way through, but I know somebody who can make a way through. And just having that hope helps to preserve this network. So when I access my central executive network, it's no longer painful. All right? I get some return, and I can see how that would help preserve the integrity of my synaptic profile here. Does that make sense? Okay.
Can all that grow back?
Yes, it can. Yes, this is reversible up to a point. Up to a point. Because what happens when you get to here, your brain derived the stress. See, when you're under this stress, this is very complicated. The brain is the most complicated organ in ostensibly the universe. I mean, it's really complex. And so there's a lot more. I have very much oversimplified this, okay? But there's another factor, is that when you are stressed, your cortisol levels shoot up. Cortisol actually causes this de-arborization as well. So cortisol is the means by which these things fall apart. Now, when stress goes away, when depression is treated, you can go back. But if you stay this way for a long time, you're actually going to lose brain cells at an accelerated rate. Okay, because brain-derived neurotrophic factor not only stimulates synaptogenesis, but neurogenesis as well. Because there are a couple areas of the brain where you can continue to grow new neurons. All right, the entorhinal cortex and the dentate nucleus of the hippocampus. And so you can actually replace neurons that way. But if you lose BDNF because of stress, then no, you're not going to do that. And so you could literally have brain atrophy that is partially not reversible. Okay, so it starts out as pseudo-dementia, which is reversible. But if you keep it up, it's no longer pseudo. Okay? All right.
2 Corinthians 1, 12 through 14. Now that the worst is over, we're pleased we can report that we've come out of this with conscience and faith intact and can face the world. And even more importantly, face you with our heads held high. But it wasn't by any fancy footwork on our part. It was God who kept us focused on Him uncompromised. Don't try to read between the lines or look for hidden meanings in this letter. We're writing plain, unembellished truth, hoping that you'll now see the whole picture as well as you've seen some of the details. We want you to be as proud of us as we are of you when we stand together before our Master Jesus.
So we'll do the rest of it later. But because this is like one point, and it needs to stick with us. I mean, I need to be reminded of this stuff myself. All right, that this is, and I think for myself, I need to be reminded because, when I have a person in front of me that has any kind of faith, even if they just call themselves a Christian, these are things that we can bring into it. And give them some hope. And I've done this before, and I gotta keep remembering that so that I don't just hand out drugs automatically. I need to say something sometimes, that you're not hopeless. There is hope, and you have, as a believer, you have attributes, you have options, you have a resource in God that people that don't follow Christ, that they don't have. This is your greatest resource. And sometimes God is allowing us to go through these hopeless, scary situations so that we learn not to depend on ourselves. Okay, for myself, had I not gone through that horrible, dark place in my life, I would never have learned that God is all I need. I would never have learned that He really is sufficient. All right, I'd faced other bad situations. That was the bleakest, most horrible thing ever. Partly because I didn't just lose a wife. She was my best friend on top of it. She really was. I mean, my whole social world was her. And, losing her and the kids and everything was just the most gut-wrenching, horrible, awful experience I've ever experienced. And, that was as bad as it gets. That was just like, it doesn't get any, it was like, there's nothing, I mean, I'd had third-degree burns all over my body. I've known what suffering is. That was the most deep, horrible suffering I ever did.
It's worse than a death, I think.
It is. It is much worse because when somebody dies, you have the memories. You can go through the picture books and bring up the good memories again. When you go through a betrayal like that, everything is gone, and so you lose your losses are way higher. They're way higher. But you need to see. You really need reassurance that God is not just there, but that He is able to give you a future when you can't see one. Okay.